In the world of elite military operations, respect isn't given, it's earned through blood, sweat, and unwavering determination. But what happens when that respect is denied not because of lack of skill, but because of assumptions that run deeper than the ocean itself? This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a woman whose journey from overlooked outsider to recognized warrior would challenge everything the Navy SEALs thought they knew about strength, courage, and what it truly means to earn the Trident. Some battles are fought on foreign shores. Others are fought in the very halls where heroes are supposed to be made. Sarah's war began the moment she stepped into a world that wasn't ready for her, and it wouldn't end until a single piece of metal on her finger forced them to see the warrior they had refused to acknowledge. The Trident doesn't lie. It doesn't choose favorites. It only recognizes those who have proven themselves worthy in the crucible of the most demanding military training on Earth. But, sometimes, even the most sacred symbols need a moment to remind everyone what they truly represent. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her dress blues one final time before stepping out of the taxi at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine military installation, and she could hear the distant sound of ocean waves crashing against the shore. This was it, her new assignment, her chance to prove herself in a world that had always seemed just out of reach. At 28, Sarah had already served 8 years in the Navy, including 2 deployments in Afghanistan as a hospital corpsman. Her record was spotless, her recommendations glowing, and her determination unshakable. Yet as she walked through the entrance of the building that housed some of the most elite warriors in the world, she felt the familiar weight of being the outsider looking in. The receptionist, a young petty officer with crisp uniform creases, barely looked up from his computer screen. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he'd rather not. "Petty Officer First Class Sarah Mitchell reporting for duty," she said, placing her orders on the desk. "I'm assigned to the Medical Support Unit." The petty officer glanced at her papers, then at her, then back at the papers. His expression shifted to one of mild confusion, as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. "Medical support? Are you sure you're in the right place?" Sarah had heard variations of this question more times than she cared to count. "Positive. I'm supposed to report to Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez." With a shrug that spoke volumes, the receptionist picked up his phone. "Chief? There's a female corpsman here who says she's supposed to report to you." There was a pause. "Yes, sir. I'll send her back." As Sarah walked down the hallway, she noticed the walls lined with photographs of SEAL teams throughout the decades. Hundreds of faces stared back at her, all of them male, all of them radiating the kind of confidence that came from knowing they belonged to the most exclusive military brotherhood in the world. She had studied these photos online, read about the missions, the training, the brotherhood that bound these warriors together. But seeing them here, in person, made her feel smaller somehow. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez was waiting for her outside his office. He was a stocky man in his 40s with graying hair and arms that looked like they could bend steel bars. His handshake was firm but brief, and his eyes held the kind of wariness that suggested he'd been caught off guard by her assignment. "Mitchell," he said, looking her up and down. "I'll be honest with you, I wasn't expecting a woman for this position." "Are you sure you're ready for what this entails?" "I've been ready my entire career, Chief," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I didn't request special treatment to get here, and I don't expect it now." Rodriguez nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. "Fair enough. Let me be clear about something from the start. This isn't a regular Navy medical unit. The men you'll be supporting are the best of the best, and they expect the same from everyone around them. They don't have time for hand-holding or feelings. You either keep up, or you don't belong here." "Understood, Chief. We'll see." He turned and started walking down another corridor. "Come on. Let me show you around and introduce you to the team." The medical facility was state-of-the-art, equipped with everything needed to handle the unique healthcare challenges that came with supporting special operations forces. Sarah felt a surge of excitement as she saw the advanced trauma equipment, the hyperbaric chambers, and the specialized rehabilitation facilities. This was exactly where she wanted to be. Your primary responsibility will be providing medical support during training exercises, Rodriguez explained as they walked. These guys push their bodies to the absolute limit, and injuries are common. You'll also assist with physical fitness assessments, dive physicals, and any other medical needs that arise. They entered a large room where several men in Navy PT uniforms were going through post-workout stretches. The conversation stopped abruptly when they noticed Sarah, and she felt the weight of their stares. These weren't just any sailors. Even without seeing their Trident pins, she could tell from their bearing, their obvious physical conditioning, and the way they carried themselves that these were SEALs. "Gentlemen," Rodriguez called out, "this is Petty Officer Mitchell. She's joining our medical team." The responses were polite but cool. A few nods, a couple of half-hearted welcome aboard comments, and then, the conversations resumed as if she weren't there. Sarah had expected this reaction, but it still stung. She had spent years proving herself to skeptical colleagues, but somehow it felt different here. These men didn't just doubt her competence, they seemed to question her right to be in their presence at all. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into her work with the intensity that had carried her through every challenge in her military career. She arrived early, stayed late, and approached every task with meticulous attention to detail. She studied the unique medical challenges faced by Special Operations Forces, familiarized herself with the latest treatment protocols for diving injuries, and learned everything she could about the physical demands of SEAL training. But, despite her efforts, she remained largely invisible to the SEALs she was supposed to support. They would come in for treatment or assessment, answer her medical questions with minimal responses, and leave as quickly as possible. Some were merely indifferent, while others made no effort to hide their skepticism about having a woman involved in their medical care. The worst was Petty Officer Second Class Jake Morrison, a cocky operator in his mid-20s who seemed to take personal offense at her presence. During a routine physical assessment, he made it clear what he thought about women in special operations support roles. "No offense, Doc," he said, using the casual title that corpsmen were often called, "but when I'm bleeding out in some godforsaken desert, I want someone who understands what I've been through taking care of me. Someone who's been there." Sarah continued taking his blood pressure, her voice remaining professional. "I've been in combat zones, Petty Officer Morrison. I've treated traumatic injuries under fire, and I've saved lives when it mattered most." Morrison snorted. "Regular Navy combat zones aren't the same thing, and you know it. You've never been through BUD/S. You've never earned the Trident. You don't know what it means to be part of this brotherhood." The blood pressure cuff felt tight around Morrison's arm, and Sarah realized she might have been inflating it a bit more than necessary. She forced herself to relax and complete the assessment professionally. "My job isn't to be part of your brotherhood, Petty Officer Morrison. It's to keep you healthy and ready for whatever mission you're assigned." "That's exactly my point," Morrison said, pulling his sleeve down as soon as she finished. "You see this as just a job. For us, it's everything." After Morrison left, Sarah sat alone in the medical bay, staring at her hands. She had thick skin. You didn't survive as a woman in the military without developing it, but there was something particularly frustrating about this situation. She wasn't asking to be a SEAL. She wasn't trying to infiltrate their brotherhood or diminish their accomplishments. She just wanted to do her job and be treated with the basic respect that her rank and experience deserved. Chief Rodriguez found her there an hour later, reviewing patient files with perhaps more intensity than necessary. "How are you settling in, Mitchell?" Sarah looked up from her work. "Fine, Chief. Just getting familiar with the caseload." Rodriguez pulled up a chair. He had been watching her interactions with the SEALs, and, while he had his own reservations about the assignment, he was beginning to respect her professionalism. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. Some of these guys have never worked with a female corpsman, especially not in this environment. They're not trying to be jerks, well, most of them aren't, but they're used to a certain dynamic. I understand that, Chief. I'm not expecting them to change their entire culture overnight. I just want the opportunity to prove that I can do my job effectively." "That's all anyone can ask for," Rodriguez said. "But you should know that proving yourself here is different from proving yourself anywhere else you've been. These men have been through hell together. They've saved each other's lives, watched each other's backs in situations most people can't even imagine. That creates bonds that outsiders have a hard time understanding, let alone breaking into. Sarah nodded. I'm not trying to break into anything, Chief. I just want to be good at my job. Then, keep doing what you're doing. Show up, work hard, and let your actions speak for themselves. Eventually, they'll come around. But, as days turned into weeks, Sarah began to wonder if Rodriguez was being overly optimistic. The SEALs continued to treat her with polite indifference at best and barely concealed hostility at worst. She found herself eating lunch alone, excluded from the casual conversations that built relationships in any workplace. When she offered suggestions or insights during medical briefings, they were acknowledged but rarely acted upon. The breaking point came during a training exercise simulation. Sarah was stationed at the medical support station, ready to provide treatment for any injuries that occurred during the mock mission. The exercise involved a complex water-based operation, and she had spent hours reviewing the specific medical challenges associated with cold water exposure, potential diving injuries, and the various trauma scenarios that could result from the planned activities. Everything went wrong during the exercise. What was supposed to be a routine training evolution turned into a nightmare when one of the SEALs, Petty Officer 3rd Class Danny Kim, got tangled in some equipment underwater and surfaced in distress. Sarah was the first medical responder on scene as Kim was pulled from the water, coughing up seawater and showing signs of near drowning. Without hesitation, Sarah took charge of the medical response. She quickly assessed Kim's condition, cleared his airway, and began the appropriate treatment protocol for near-drowning victims. Her actions were swift, confident, and exactly what the situation required. Within minutes, Kim's condition stabilized, and he was breathing normally again. But, instead of recognition for her quick thinking and medical expertise, Sarah found herself facing criticism from Morrison and several other SEALs who witnessed the incident. They questioned her assessment, second-guessed her treatment decisions, and made it clear that they would have preferred to wait for one of the male corpsmen to arrive on scene. She was just following standard protocols, Morrison said to another SEAL, apparently not caring that Sarah could hear every word. Any corpsman could have done the same thing. It's not like she did anything special. Sarah felt something break inside her chest. She had just potentially saved a man's life, and, instead of gratitude or even basic acknowledgement of her competence, she was getting dismissed as if her actions were meaningless. That night, she sat in her small apartment off base and seriously considered requesting a transfer. Maybe Rodriguez was wrong. Maybe some barriers weren't meant to be broken. But, as she sat there feeling sorry for herself, Sarah's eyes fell on the small wooden box on her dresser. Inside that box was something she had never told anyone about, something that might change everything if the right person ever noticed it. She opened the box and stared at the contents, running her finger over the cold metal surface. Tomorrow would be different, she decided. Not because she would change her approach or lower her standards to make others comfortable, but because she would stop hiding who she really was. Some secrets were meant to be kept, but others were meant to be revealed at exactly the right moment. Sarah Mitchell closed the box and went to bed, not knowing that within a few days, everything would change. The very men who had dismissed her were about to learn something that would force them to see her in an entirely different light. But, first, she would have to endure one more test of her resolve, one more moment when everything she had worked for seemed about to slip away. The Trident ring in that box wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of something extraordinary, something that would soon turn her from an outsider into someone who belonged in ways none of them had ever imagined. The morning after the near-drowning incident, Sarah arrived at work to find the atmosphere in the medical bay noticeably colder. Word of her successful treatment of Petty Officer Kim had spread, but, instead of earning respect, it seemed to have deepened the resentment some of the SEALs felt toward her presence. She could hear whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered her room, and the few SEALs who had been neutral toward her now seemed to have joined the camp of those who questioned her right to be there. Chief Rodriguez called her into his office before noon. His expression was grim, and Sarah knew immediately that she wasn't going to like whatever he had to say. "Mitchell, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind her. "I've been getting some feedback about yesterday's incident." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. What kind of feedback, Chief? Some of the men feel that you overstepped your bounds. They think you should have waited for backup before taking charge of Kim's treatment. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Chief, Kim was showing signs of severe respiratory distress. Standard protocol for near-drowning victims requires immediate intervention. Waiting could have cost him his life. Rodriguez held up his hand. I'm not questioning your medical judgment, Mitchell. Your treatment was textbook perfect, and Kim is alive and healthy because of your quick thinking. But this isn't just about medical protocols. Then, what is it about? Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. It's about chain of command, unit cohesion, and the way things work around here, Rodriguez said, his voice heavy with reluctance. Some of these guys feel like you're trying to prove a point instead of just doing your job. Sarah stared at the chief in disbelief. So I'm supposed to let someone die to avoid hurting feelings? Is that what you're telling me? I'm telling you that perception matters as much as reality in this environment. These men need to trust the people around them completely, and, right now, some of them don't trust you. Because I'm a woman. Rodriguez sighed. Look, Mitchell, I don't like this situation any more than you do. But I've got to think about unit morale and mission effectiveness. If the SEALs don't have confidence in their medical support, it affects their performance. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. What are you saying, Chief? I'm saying that maybe this assignment isn't working out the way we hoped it would. There's an opening in the medical unit at North Island. It's a good position, and you'd be working with people who appreciate your skills. The suggestion felt like a knife twist. After weeks of fighting to prove herself, she was being asked to quietly disappear rather than continue to make waves. You're asking me to quit. I'm offering you an alternative that might be better for everyone involved. Sarah stood up, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. With respect, Chief, I didn't come here to take the easy path. I came here to do a job that needs to be done, and I'm good at it. If some of your SEALs have a problem with that, maybe they need to examine their own attitudes instead of expecting me to disappear. Rodriguez looked at her for a long moment. You're not going to make this easy, are you? Since when is anything in the military supposed to be easy? Before the chief could respond, there was a knock on the door. Come in, Rodriguez called. Petty Officer Morrison entered, looking pleased with himself. Chief, sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation developing with the new training evolution that starts next week. The medical support requirements are pretty extensive, and I wanted to make sure we have the right personnel assigned. Sarah caught the emphasis on right personnel and felt her anger rising. Morrison was clearly here to advocate for her removal from the upcoming training exercise, probably the most high-profile assignment she'd have since arriving at the command. What are you thinking, Morrison? Rodriguez asked. Well, Chief, this evolution is going to be particularly demanding. It involves extended underwater operations, potential high-altitude insertions, and some pretty realistic combat scenarios. The medical support team needs to be able to keep up with the pace and understand the specific challenges our guys face. Morrison glanced at Sarah with barely concealed smugness. No offense to Petty Officer Mitchell, but I think this might be beyond her experience level. Maybe it would be better to have Doc Peterson handle the medical support for this one. Doc Peterson was a male corpsman with less experience than Sarah but who had been at the command longer. Sarah knew this wasn't about qualifications, it was about removing her from the most visible and important assignment she'd been given since arriving. What makes you think Petty Officer Mitchell isn't qualified to handle the medical support for this exercise? Rodriguez asked. Morrison seemed surprised by the question, as if he'd expected Rodriguez to automatically agree with his assessment. Well, Chief, it's just that this kind of operation requires someone who really understands what our guys go through. Someone who's been in similar situations and knows how to respond under pressure. Sarah couldn't stay quiet any longer. Are you questioning my ability to perform under pressure, Petty Officer Morrison? Because my record suggests otherwise. Morrison turned to face her directly. Your record with regular Navy units, maybe. But this isn't the regular Navy. This is a whole different level. Different how? Sarah challenged. Different because when we're out there, we depend on each other completely. We need to know that everyone around us has proven themselves in the same crucible we've been through. We need to know that when things go bad, we're surrounded by people who understand what it means to be a SEAL. I'm not trying to be a SEAL, Sarah said. I'm trying to be a corpsman who supports SEALs. There's a difference. Morrison shook his head. That's exactly the problem. You don't get it. Being part of this community isn't just about having the right job title. It's about earning your place through shared sacrifice and proving that you belong. Sarah felt something snap inside her. And how exactly am I supposed to prove that I belong when people like you are determined to exclude me from every opportunity to do so? Maybe that's because some people aren't meant to be here, Morrison shot back. The room fell silent. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking, but he didn't intervene. Sarah realized that this was her moment. She could back down, accept the transfer to North Island, and continue her career in an environment where she wouldn't face this kind of resistance. Or she could stand her ground and fight for the right to prove herself, even if it meant facing more hostility and resistance. Petty Officer Morrison, Sarah said, her voice deadly calm, you want to talk about proving yourself? About earning your place? Fine. Let's talk about that. She stepped closer to Morrison, meeting his gaze directly. You think I haven't earned the right to be here because I haven't been through BUD/S? You think I don't understand what it means to be pushed to your absolute limits, to face situations where failure isn't an option, to be part of something bigger than yourself? Morrison crossed his arms. That's exactly what I think. Sarah nodded slowly. Then, you're about to learn something about making assumptions. She turned to Rodriguez. Chief, I want to propose something. Let me participate in the next training evolution not just as medical support, but as a full participant. Let me go through the same challenges the SEALs face during this exercise. If I can't keep up, if I can't handle the pressure, then I'll accept the transfer to North Island without another word of complaint. Both men stared at her in shock. Rodriguez was the first to find his voice. Mitchell, that's not how things work. The training evolutions are designed for SEAL operators, not support personnel. The medical support personnel need to be able to access injured operators anywhere the evolution takes them, Sarah pointed out. If I can't handle the physical and mental challenges of the exercise, then I can't effectively do my job during it. Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to try to keep up with SEALs during a full training evolution? Do you have any idea what you're asking for? I have a pretty good idea, Sarah replied. The question is whether you have the confidence in your own training and abilities to let me try. Morrison's expression darkened. This isn't about confidence. This is about respect for what it takes to earn the right to stand alongside us. Then, let me earn it. Rodriguez held up his hands. This is getting out of control. Mitchell, what you're proposing isn't practical or safe. These training evolutions aren't designed for 4 women? Sarah interrupted. Is that what you were going to say, Chief? For non-SEAL personnel, Rodriguez finished firmly. The physical demands, the safety protocols, the team dynamics, everything is calibrated for operators who have been through specific training. Sarah felt her last chance slipping away. She had tried to prove herself through excellence in her regular duties, and it hadn't been enough. She had tried to demonstrate her value through life-saving medical intervention, and it had been dismissed. Now she was being told that she couldn't even be given the opportunity to prove herself on the same playing field as the men who questioned her worth. Fine, she said. Then, I guess we'll never know, will we? She turned toward the door, but Morrison's voice stopped her. Wait a minute. You really think you could handle a full SEAL training evolution? Sarah turned back to face him. I think I've been underestimated my entire career, and I've proven those people wrong every single time. Morrison looked at Rodriguez, then back at Sarah. You know what? Maybe it's time someone called your bluff. Chief, what if we modify the evolution slightly? Make it a challenge that tests both medical knowledge and physical capability? If she wants to prove she belongs here, let's give her the chance. Rodriguez looked like he was developing a headache. Morrison, that's not Chief, hear me out, Morrison continued. We design a scenario that requires the medical support person to keep up with the team during a realistic operation. Multiple casualty situation, challenging environment, time pressure. If she can handle it, then she's proven she can do the job. If she can't, then she accepts that this assignment isn't right for her. Sarah felt her heart racing. This was either her chance to finally prove herself or her opportunity to fail spectacularly in front of everyone who doubted her. I accept. Rodriguez looked back and forth between them. This is a bad idea. If something goes wrong, if someone gets hurt during this improvised challenge, then I take full responsibility, Sarah said. Chief, you said yourself that these men need to trust their medical support completely. This is my chance to earn that trust. Morrison was grinning now, but it wasn't a friendly expression. All right then. We'll set up a scenario that will test everything you think you're capable of. But, when you wash out, I don't want to hear any excuses about unfair treatment or impossible standards. You won't, Sarah promised. After Morrison left, Rodriguez turned to Sarah with a mixture of admiration and concern. Mitchell, I hope you know what you just signed up for. Morrison isn't going to make this easy for you. I wouldn't want him to, Sarah replied. Easy doesn't prove anything. But, as she left Rodriguez's office and returned to her duties, Sarah felt the weight of what she had committed to. She had just agreed to face a challenge designed by someone who wanted to see her fail, in front of an audience that was already convinced she didn't belong. The stakes couldn't be higher, her career, her reputation, and her sense of self-worth were all on the line. That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment and opened the wooden box on her dresser. She stared at the Trident ring inside, running her thumb over its surface. The men who doubted her thought they knew what it took to earn one of these. They thought they understood sacrifice, commitment, and the price of belonging to an elite warrior community. They were about to learn that some people earned their place in ways that couldn't be seen or imagined. Sarah had never told anyone about the ring or how she had come to possess it. But, depending on how the next few days played out, she might have to reveal a secret that would change everything. For now, though, she had to prepare for what Morrison and his allies were planning. They thought they were setting up her failure, but Sarah had faced impossible challenges before. She had survived things that would have broken other people, and she had learned to find strength in places others never thought to look. The difference was that this time, she wouldn't be facing the challenge alone. She would be carrying the memory and the legacy of someone who had already proven that limitations were just another obstacle to overcome. The ring was more than jewelry, it was a reminder of what was possible when someone refused to accept that they didn't belong. Morrison thought he was about to expose Sarah's weaknesses. Instead, he was about to discover strengths that none of them had ever imagined. The challenge was scheduled for the following Thursday, giving Sarah 5 days to prepare for what Morrison had described as a realistic assessment of medical support capability under operational conditions. The vague description didn't fool anyone. This was designed to be a test that would expose her limitations and justify her removal from the command. Word of the challenge spread quickly through the SEAL community at Coronado. Some viewed it as entertainment, curious to see how the female corpsman would handle herself when pushed beyond her comfort zone. Others saw it as unnecessary harassment that reflected poorly on the command's leadership. But most seemed to view it as an inevitable conclusion to a situation that never should have been allowed to develop in the first place. Sarah spent her preparation time studying everything she could about advanced trauma medicine in challenging environments. She reviewed protocols for treating injuries in water, at altitude, and under combat conditions. She practiced emergency procedures until she could perform them automatically, even when exhausted or under pressure. But she knew that medical knowledge alone wouldn't be enough to succeed in whatever Morrison had planned. So she also began a punishing physical training regimen. Every morning before work, she ran 5 miles along the beach near her apartment. Every evening, she visited a local gym where she pushed herself through workouts designed to build the kind of functional strength that would be required for carrying equipment over long distances or evacuating casualties from difficult terrain. The other corpsmen at the command watched her preparations with a mixture of sympathy and skepticism. Doc Peterson, the corpsman Morrison had suggested as her replacement, seemed genuinely conflicted about the situation. "You know Morrison's trying to set you up to fail, right?" he asked her one afternoon as she reviewed diving medicine protocols during her lunch break. Sarah looked up from her textbook. "I know exactly what Morrison's trying to do. The question is whether he's capable of designing something I can't handle." Peterson shook his head. "Sarah, I've been here for 3 years. I've seen some of these guys' training evolutions, and they're brutal even for people who've been through BUD/S. Morrison knows every possible way to push someone past their breaking point." "Then, I guess I'll find out where my breaking point actually is," Sarah replied, returning to her studies. But Peterson's warning stayed with her. She knew Morrison would design the challenge to exploit what he perceived as her weaknesses, her smaller size, her lack of SEAL training, her outsider status within the community. The smart move would be to prepare for the obvious challenges: physical exhaustion, time pressure, complex medical scenarios under stress. What worried her more were the intangible elements that Morrison might incorporate. The psychological pressure of performing in front of an audience that wanted her to fail. The challenge of maintaining medical focus while being pushed to physical exhaustion. The difficulty of making life or death decisions when every choice would be scrutinized and criticized. On Tuesday evening, 2 days before the challenge, Sarah was leaving the gym when she encountered Petty Officer Kim, the SEAL whose life she had potentially saved during the training incident. She hadn't spoken to him since that day, and she was surprised when he approached her in the parking lot. "Petty Officer Mitchell," he said, his voice hesitant. "I heard about the challenge Morrison set up for you." Sarah tensed, expecting another lecture about knowing her place or staying in her lane. "What about it?" Kim looked uncomfortable, as if he was struggling with something he needed to say but didn't quite know how to express. "I wanted you to know that some of us think this whole thing is bullshit. You saved my life the other day, and, instead of getting thanked for it, you're being put through some kind of hazing ritual." The comment caught Sarah off guard. She had assumed that all the SEALs supported Morrison's position, or at least remained neutral about her presence at the command. "I appreciate that, Petty Officer Kim, but I agreed to the challenge. I want the opportunity to prove myself." "That's just it," Kim said. "You already proved yourself when you took care of me. You didn't hesitate, you didn't second-guess yourself, and you did exactly what needed to be done. In my book, that's all the proof anyone should need." Sarah felt an unexpected surge of emotion at Kim's words. After weeks of being treated like an unwanted intruder, having someone acknowledge her competence and value felt almost overwhelming. "Thank you for saying that." Kim nodded. "Look, I don't know what Morrison has planned for you, but I know him well enough to guarantee it won't be fair. He's going to try to create a situation where failure is the only possible outcome." "Then, I'll just have to find a way to succeed anyway," Sarah said. "Maybe," Kim replied. "But if things go wrong, if you get hurt or if this whole thing turns into something dangerous, I want you to know that not all of us support what's happening. Some of us recognize good medicine and good people when we see them." After Kim left, Sarah sat in her car for several minutes, staring out at the darkening sky. Kim's support meant more to her than she had expected, but it also highlighted how isolated her position had become. She was about to face a challenge designed by someone who wanted to humiliate her, in front of an audience that largely believed she didn't belong, with only a handful of allies who might speak up if things went too far. But, as she drove home, Sarah found herself thinking not about the people who doubted her, but about someone who would have understood exactly what she was facing. Someone who had faced similar challenges and had found a way to overcome them through sheer determination and refusal to accept defeat. That night, Sarah called her mother for the first time in several weeks. They talked about family news, work, and the usual topics that filled their conversations. But, toward the end of the call, Sarah found herself asking a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Mom, do you think Dad would be proud of what I'm doing?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sarah's father had died when she was 16, and conversations about him were still difficult for both of them, even 12 years later. "Sarah, your father would be incredibly proud of everything you've accomplished," her mother said finally. "He always said that you had the strongest will of anyone he'd ever met, including himself. He would want you to keep fighting for what you believe in. Even if it means risking everything? Especially then. Your father never took the easy path when he thought something important was at stake. He taught you that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you." After the call ended, Sarah opened the wooden box and stared at the Trident ring inside. Her father's ring. The symbol of everything he had accomplished and everything he had sacrificed to earn his place among the most elite warriors in the world. He had never lived to see women allowed in combat roles, never seen the barriers slowly beginning to fall in the special operations community. But he had raised his daughter to believe that those barriers were meant to be challenged. Thursday morning arrived with typical Southern California perfection: clear skies, mild temperature, and a light breeze coming off the Pacific. Sarah arrived at the command early, wearing PT gear and carrying a medical kit that she had packed and repacked a dozen times to ensure she had everything she might need. Morrison was waiting for her in the briefing room, along with Chief Rodriguez and several other SEALs who would apparently be observing the challenge. The setup was more formal than Sarah had expected, with maps, photographs, and what appeared to be a detailed scenario outline laid out on the table. "Ready for your big test, Doc?" Morrison asked with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied. Rodriguez stepped forward with what appeared to be the official briefing materials. "All right, Mitchell, here's the situation. You're supporting a 4-man SEAL team during a hostage rescue operation on San Clemente Island. The team has successfully extracted the hostage but has taken casualties during the exfiltration. Your job is to keep the wounded alive while the team moves to the extraction point." Sarah studied the maps and photographs Rodriguez handed her. San Clemente Island was a rugged, largely uninhabited piece of land about 60 miles southwest of San Diego. It was used extensively for military training because of its challenging terrain and isolation from civilian populations. "The team will start here," Rodriguez continued, pointing to a location on the map, "and needs to reach the extraction point here, approximately 3 miles away. The terrain includes rocky cliffs, dense brush, and several water obstacles. You'll need to provide medical care for 2 simulated casualties while keeping pace with the team." Sarah nodded, studying the route and trying to anticipate the challenges she would face. 3 miles didn't sound like much, but she knew that distance could be deceiving when it involved difficult terrain and the additional burden of caring for wounded team members. Morrison stepped forward with obvious satisfaction. "Oh, and, Doc? There's a time limit. You've got 2 hours to get from start to finish. If you don't make it, the hostage and the casualties die, and the mission is a failure." 2 hours to cover 3 miles of challenging terrain while providing medical care sounded tight but manageable. Sarah was about to say so when Morrison continued. "Did I mention that the casualties have to be carried? No vehicles, no stretchers, no assistance from the team members who aren't wounded. Just you and whatever equipment you can manage to transport." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Carrying 2 adult men over 3 miles of rough terrain in 2 hours wasn't just challenging, it was bordering on impossible. Morrison had indeed designed this to ensure her failure. "Any questions?" Morrison asked. Sarah looked at the maps again, her mind racing through possible strategies and approaches. "What are the specific injuries I'll be treating?" 1 simulated gunshot wound to the abdomen, 1 compound fracture of the tibia with significant blood loss, Rodriguez answered. "Both casualties will be played by actual team members who will simulate the appropriate symptoms and limitations." Sarah nodded. Both injuries would require immediate and ongoing medical attention, making it difficult to focus primarily on movement and navigation. This was clearly designed to force her to choose between providing proper medical care and meeting the time and distance requirements. "When do we start?" she asked. Morrison checked his watch. "The helicopter to San Clemente leaves in 30 minutes. Hope you're ready to prove that you belong here." As Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared for transport to the island, she tried to push aside the growing certainty that Morrison had created an impossible situation. She had agreed to this challenge, and backing out now would confirm every negative assumption that had been made about her capabilities. But, as the helicopter lifted off from Coronado and headed toward San Clemente Island, Sarah found herself reaching unconsciously for the chain around her neck. Hidden beneath her PT shirt was her father's Trident ring, which she had decided to wear for the first time since arriving at the command. She wasn't ready to reveal its significance yet, but having it close gave her strength. Her father had faced his own impossible challenges during his SEAL career. He had found ways to succeed when others said success was impossible. Today, Sarah would find out whether she had inherited more than just his ring, whether she had also inherited his refusal to accept defeat, even when the odds were stacked against her. The helicopter banked toward the island, and Sarah could see the rugged coastline growing larger below them. In a few hours, she would either prove that she belonged among the elite warriors of naval special warfare, or she would be packing her bags for a transfer to a safer, easier assignment where no one would question her right to be there. Either way, she was about to discover exactly what she was made of. The helicopter touched down on San Clemente Island with a jarring thud that sent vibrations through Sarah's body. She had spent the 20-minute flight reviewing her strategy, checking her medical equipment one final time, and trying to calm the nervous energy that threatened to overwhelm her focus. Now, as the rotor blades slowly wound down, she could see Morrison and the other observers setting up their monitoring station near a cluster of military vehicles. "This is it, Doc," Morrison called out as Sarah disembarked. "Your casualties are about half a mile inland. You'll find them at the coordinates marked on your map, along with the 2 team members who will be simulating the injuries. Remember, you've got 2 hours from the time I give the start signal." Sarah adjusted her medical pack and checked the GPS device Rodriguez had given her. The weight of her equipment was substantial: to trauma supplies, for fluids, pain medication, splinting materials, and enough gear to handle any emergency that might arise during the simulated mission. She had deliberately packed more than she thought she would need, knowing that being caught without essential supplies would be worse than dealing with extra weight. "Any final questions before we begin?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah shook her head. She had spent enough time analyzing the challenge. Now it was time to execute. Morrison raised his hand with obvious satisfaction. "Your time starts now." Sarah began jogging toward the coordinates on her GPS, her mind already focused on the medical priorities she would face. The terrain was rougher than the photographs had suggested: loose rocks, thick brush, and uneven ground that required constant attention to avoid injury. But she had trained for this, and her body felt strong and ready for the challenge ahead. The first casualty site was located in a small clearing about 15 minutes inland. As Sarah approached, she could see 2 figures on the ground and 2 others standing nearby. The standing figures were Petty Officers Martinez and Thompson, both experienced SEALs who would be simulating the uninjured team members. The casualties were Morrison's close friends, Petty Officers Anderson and Walsh, who were clearly enjoying their roles as wounded warriors in need of rescue. "About time, Doc," Anderson called out as Sarah entered the clearing. "I'm bleeding out over here." Sarah quickly assessed the simulated casualties. Anderson was playing the abdominal gunshot wound, complete with fake blood and realistic symptoms of shock and blood loss. Walsh had his leg splinted to simulate the compound fracture, with more fake blood and appropriate signs of pain and distress. Both men were good actors, and the simulations were realistic enough to trigger Sarah's medical training instincts. "All right, let me get a quick assessment," Sarah said, dropping her pack and pulling out her medical supplies. "Anderson, I need you to lie still while I check your vitals." "Walsh, how's your pain level?" For the next 20 minutes, Sarah worked with focused intensity to stabilize both casualties. She started 4 fluids for Anderson to combat shock and blood loss, administered pain medication to both patients, and reinforced Walsh's splint to ensure it would hold during transport. Her movements were swift and confident, and she found herself falling into the rhythm that had carried her through countless real medical emergencies. But, as she worked, Sarah became increasingly aware that Anderson and Walsh were making the scenario more difficult than necessary. Anderson kept losing consciousness at critical moments, forcing her to perform additional assessments. Walsh complained loudly about every adjustment she made to his splint, claiming that her treatment was making his pain worse. Both men seemed to be enjoying their roles a bit too much. "Okay," Sarah announced when she had completed her initial treatment. "We need to start moving toward the extraction point. The clock is ticking." This was where the real challenge began. Sarah had rigged a makeshift litter system using her pack frame and some additional materials she had brought for the purpose. But, even with the improvised stretcher, moving 2 adult men over 3 miles of rough terrain would require strength, endurance, and careful planning. "Doc," Martinez said, "Anderson's too heavy for you to carry alone. Maybe we should call this off before someone gets hurt." Sarah looked at Martinez sharply. "Are you breaking character, petty officer? Because in a real scenario, would you be suggesting that we abandon wounded team members?" Martinez looked uncomfortable. "No, but this isn't a real scenario. This is just training." "Then, let me train," Sarah said firmly. "Unless you're officially ending the exercise, I'm going to continue with the mission." She had anticipated the weight problem and had come prepared with a solution. Using a combination of techniques she had learned during her combat medic training, Sarah rigged a system that would allow her to drag both casualties on the improvised litter while distributing the weight across her body in a way that would be sustainable over long distances. The system worked, but it was brutally demanding. Within the first half mile, Sarah was sweating heavily and breathing hard. The uneven terrain made every step a challenge, and the weight of the casualties made it impossible to maintain anything resembling a normal walking pace. But she pressed on, checking on her patients every few hundred yards and making adjustments to their treatment as needed. Anderson and Walsh continued to be difficult patients. Anderson kept regaining consciousness just long enough to complain about the bumpy ride, while Walsh insisted that his leg was getting worse and demanded additional pain medication. Sarah began to suspect that their behavior was part of Morrison's plan. Not only did she have to deal with the physical challenge of moving the casualties, she also had to manage patients who were actively working against her efforts to help them. After an hour and 15 minutes, Sarah had covered less than half the required distance. Her legs were burning with fatigue, her shoulders ached from the weight of the litter system, and she was beginning to worry that she might not make the time limit. But what bothered her more was the growing realization that Anderson and Walsh were sabotaging her efforts in ways that went beyond realistic casualty simulation. The breaking point came when Walsh suddenly announced that he was going into shock and needed immediate medical attention. Sarah stopped the movement, checked his vitals, and discovered that his pulse and blood pressure were completely normal. When she pointed this out, Walsh insisted that she didn't know how to properly assess shock symptoms. "Walsh," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "I've treated real shock victims in real combat zones. Your vitals are perfect, your skin is warm and dry, and you're showing no actual signs of circulatory compromise. Stop faking symptoms that could interfere with proper medical assessment." Walsh grinned. "How do you know I'm faking? Maybe you're just not as good at medical assessment as you think you are." Sarah stared at him for a moment, realizing that this had gone far beyond a legitimate training exercise. Morrison hadn't just designed a difficult challenge, he had created a situation where the casualties themselves were working to ensure her failure. "Fine," she said quietly. "If that's how you want to play this." Sarah stood up and walked a few feet away from the group. Martinez and Thompson exchanged glances, uncertain about what was happening. Anderson and Walsh continued to grin, apparently enjoying their success in frustrating her efforts. Then, Sarah reached under her PT shirt and pulled out the chain she had been wearing around her neck. At the end of the chain was a ring, a gold trident identical to the ones worn by the men around her, but somehow more significant in this moment than any of theirs. "Anderson," she said, her voice carrying a new tone of authority that made everyone pay attention. "Walsh. Martinez. Thompson. Do any of you recognize this ring?" The 4 men stared at the trident in Sarah's hand, confusion evident on their faces. It was clearly a seal trident, but none of them understood why she would have one or what significance it might have. "This ring belonged to Senior Chief Petty Officer Michael Mitchell," Sarah continued. SEAL Team 3, 1985 to 2010. 25 years of service, 4 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and more classified operations than you guys have had hot meals. The confusion on their faces was slowly being replaced by something else as the implications of what she was saying began to sink in. Senior Chief Mitchell was killed in Afghanistan in 2010 during a direct action mission that saved the lives of 12 Marines and 2 Navy corpsmen. He was my father. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the normal sounds of wind and wildlife seemed muted as the 4 SEALs processed what Sarah had just revealed. My father earned his Trident the hard way, just like every other SEAL who's ever worn one, Sarah continued. He bled for it, sacrificed for it, and ultimately died for the values it represents. And he raised his daughter to believe that those values, courage, commitment, and the refusal to abandon your teammates weren't limited to people who happened to be born male. Anderson's grin had completely disappeared. Walsh was staring at the ring with something approaching awe. Martinez and Thompson looked like they had been slapped. So here's what's going to happen, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. You two are going to stop playing games and start acting like real casualties who want to survive. And I'm going to get all of us to that extraction point in time, because that's what my father would have done, and that's what SEALs do for each other. She put the ring back under her shirt and returned to the litter. Now, are we going to finish this mission, or do I need to explain to Morrison why his casualties didn't make it home? The change in the group's behavior was immediate and dramatic. Anderson and Walsh stopped their sabotage efforts and began behaving like genuinely injured soldiers who needed medical care. Martinez and Thompson, clearly shaken by Sarah's revelation, began offering legitimate assistance within the bounds of the exercise. With the casualties now cooperating instead of hindering her efforts, Sarah found that the remaining distance was much more manageable. She maintained a steady pace, stopping only when genuine medical needs required attention. Her training, conditioning, and determination carried her through the fatigue and discomfort that had threatened to overwhelm her earlier. With 15 minutes remaining on the clock, Sarah crested the final ridge and could see the extraction point in the valley below. The helicopter was already waiting, rotors spinning, ready to evacuate the casualties and complete the mission. As they reached the landing zone, Morrison was waiting with a stopwatch and an expression of disbelief. He had clearly expected to be timing her failure, not her success. Time, he called out as Sarah reached the designated extraction point. 1 hour, 58 minutes, 37 seconds. Sarah collapsed beside the litter, exhausted but triumphant. She had completed the challenge with less than 2 minutes to spare, but she had completed it. More importantly, she had proven that she could perform under pressure, adapt to changing circumstances, and accomplish missions that others thought were impossible. But, as she sat there catching her breath, Sarah realized that the real test hadn't been the physical challenge or even the time pressure. The real test had been finding the courage to reveal who she really was and claim her rightful place in a community that had been trying to exclude her. Morrison approached her slowly, his earlier smugness replaced by uncertainty. Mitchell, he said quietly, is what you said back there true? About your father? Sarah looked up at him, still breathing hard from the exertion. Senior Chief Michael Mitchell, SEAL Team 3. You can look it up. Morrison stared at her for a long moment, then extended his hand to help her to her feet. Why didn't you tell us this when you first arrived? Sarah accepted his assistance and stood up, brushing dirt and sweat from her uniform. Would it have mattered? Would you have treated me differently because of who my father was rather than who I am? Morrison had no answer for that question, and they both knew why. The helicopter ride back to Coronado was quiet, with everyone absorbed in their own thoughts about what had just occurred. Sarah stared out the window at the Pacific Ocean below, wondering how this revelation would change her relationships with the SEALs she worked with. She had proven she could succeed at their challenge, but, more importantly, she had revealed a connection to their community that none of them had suspected. As the helicopter approached the landing pad at Coronado, Sarah touched the ring beneath her shirt one more time. Her father had always told her that respect couldn't be given, it had to be earned. Today, she felt like she had finally earned the right to be exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was meant to do. But the real test would come in the days ahead, when she would discover whether revealing her father's legacy had changed anything fundamental about how she was perceived and treated by the men she served alongside. The morning after the San Clemente Island challenge, Sarah arrived at work expecting to face the usual mixture of indifference and hostility that had characterized her first weeks at the command. Instead, she found Chief Rodriguez waiting for her with an expression she had never seen before, something that looked almost like respect. "Mitchell," he said, "I need you to come to my office. We have some things to discuss." Sarah followed the chief down the familiar hallway, but this time the journey felt different. Word of what had happened on the island had spread quickly through the SEAL community, and she could feel eyes watching her as she passed. Some of the looks were curious, others seemed almost apologetic, but none carried the dismissive hostility she had grown accustomed to. "Close the door and have a seat," Rodriguez said once they reached his office. He pulled out a thick file folder and placed it on his desk. "First things first, I owe you an apology. I looked up your father's record after yesterday's exercise." Rodriguez opened the file and began reading. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Michael Mitchell. SEAL Team 3. 25 years of distinguished service. 4 Bronze Star Medals, 2 with Combat V for Valor. 2 Purple Hearts. Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat VA Combat Action Ribbon. Multiple overseas deployment ribbons covering operations in Grenada, Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, and several classified operations I can't discuss." He looked up at Sarah. "Your father was a genuine warrior, Mitchell. The kind of SEAL that legends are made of. His final mission report describes actions that saved 12 Marines and 2 Navy corpsmen at the cost of his own life. He was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She had never read the complete details of her father's final mission, and hearing them summarized in Rodriguez's matter-of-fact tone made his sacrifice feel both more real and more painful. "Why didn't you tell us about this when you first arrived?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah took a deep breath before answering. "Because I wanted to earn my place here based on my own merit, not ride on my father's reputation. I wanted to prove that I belonged because of what I could do, not because of who my father was." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I can respect that. But you should know that keeping it secret probably made things harder for you than they needed to be." "Maybe," Sarah said. "But it also meant that yesterday's success was mine alone. When I completed that challenge, it was because of my training, my determination, and my refusal to quit. Not because people felt sorry for the daughter of a fallen hero." Before Rodriguez could respond, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," the chief called. Sarah turned to see Morrison entering the office, but he looked different than she had ever seen him. Gone was the cocky arrogance that had characterized all their previous interactions. Instead, he seemed uncertain, almost humble. "Chief, I need to speak with Petty Officer Mitchell," Morrison said. "If now isn't a good time," "Now's fine," Rodriguez interrupted. "In fact, this conversation involves all of us." Morrison pulled up another chair and sat down, avoiding eye contact with Sarah. "Mitchell, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually." Sarah waited, curious to see where this was going. "First, I'm sorry for the way I've treated you since you arrived here. I let my assumptions about women in special operations support roles cloud my judgment about your professional competence." Morrison paused, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say next. "Second, I'm sorry for designing yesterday's challenge to be unfair. I didn't just want to test your capabilities, I wanted to prove that you didn't belong here. That was wrong." Sarah found herself studying Morrison's face, looking for signs that this apology was just another form of manipulation. But he seemed genuinely uncomfortable, as if admitting his mistakes was physically painful. "And third," Morrison continued, "I'm sorry for not recognizing what it means to be Senior Chief Mitchell's daughter. Your father saved my ass during a training exercise back in 2008. I was a cocky kid fresh out of BUD/S, and I made a stupid mistake during a dive operation that could have gotten me killed. Your father risked his own safety to get me to the surface safely." This revelation caught Sarah completely off guard. She had known that her father had worked with hundreds of SEALs during his career, but she had never imagined that Morrison might have been one of them. "He chewed me out afterward in a way that I'll never forget," Morrison said with a slight smile at the memory. "But he also took the time to teach me what I needed to know to be better. He didn't write me off as hopeless, he saw potential and helped me reach it." Morrison finally made eye contact with Sarah. "I should have recognized that same potential in you instead of trying to tear you down. Your father would have been ashamed of how I've behaved." The silence in the office stretched for several seconds before Sarah found her voice. "Jake," she said, using his first name for the first time, "I appreciate the apology. But I need you to understand something. I don't want to be accepted here because of who my father was. I want to be accepted because of who I am." Morrison nodded. "After yesterday, I don't think that's going to be a problem anymore. What you did on San Clemente wasn't just impressive, it was exactly what a SEAL would have done in the same situation. You adapted, you overcame obstacles, you refused to quit, and you completed the mission. That's all anyone can ask for." Rodriguez had been listening to this exchange with obvious satisfaction. "Which brings me to the reason I asked you to come in this morning, Mitchell. Based on yesterday's performance and my reassessment of your overall capabilities, I'm recommending you for a new position." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "What kind of position, Chief?" "Medical team leader for the new Joint Training Initiative," Rodriguez said. "It's a position that involves working directly with SEAL teams during advanced training exercises. You'd be responsible for medical planning, emergency response, and ensuring that our operators receive the best possible medical support during some of the most challenging training evolutions we conduct." The offer was beyond anything Sarah had dared to hope for when she first arrived at the command. It was exactly the kind of position she had dreamed about: direct involvement with SEAL operations, significant responsibility, and the opportunity to make a real difference in mission success. "There's just one thing," Rodriguez continued. "The position requires the complete confidence and support of the SEAL teams you'd be working with. Morrison here has agreed to serve as the liaison between the medical team and the operators. He'll be vouching for your competence and ensuring that the transition goes smoothly." Sarah looked back and forth between Rodriguez and Morrison, hardly believing what she was hearing. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious," Morrison said. "Look, Mitchell, Sarah, I spent weeks trying to prove that you didn't belong here. Yesterday you proved that I was wrong about everything. The least I can do is help make sure that other people don't make the same mistakes I did." Over the following days, Sarah began to notice changes in how she was treated throughout the command. The polite indifference that had characterized most of her interactions was replaced by genuine respect and inclusion. SEALs who had previously ignored her now stopped to talk about training requirements, medical protocols, and operational challenges. She found herself invited to planning sessions, included in informal conversations, and treated as a valued member of the team rather than an unwelcome outsider. The change wasn't universal or immediate. Some members of the SEAL community remained skeptical about women in support roles, and Sarah knew that she would continue to face challenges and resistance. But the core group of operators she worked with most closely had come to accept her as a professional equal, and that acceptance was gradually spreading to others. 2 weeks after the San Clemente challenge, Sarah was working late in the medical bay when she heard familiar voices in the hallway. She looked up to see Commander James Patterson, the commanding officer of the SEAL Command, walking toward her office with several other senior officers. "Petty Officer Mitchell," Commander Patterson said as he entered the medical bay, "I hope you have a few minutes to talk." Sarah stood at attention. "Of course, sir. How can I help you?" Commander Patterson was a legend in the SEAL community, a career officer who had commanded units in every major conflict of the past 2 decades. Sarah had seen him around the command but had never interacted with him directly. "I've been hearing some interesting reports about your recent performance," the commander said. "Both from Chief Rodriguez and from several of my team leaders. They tell me that you've been making quite an impression." Sarah felt nervous energy building in her stomach. "I've been trying to do my job to the best of my ability, sir." Commander Patterson smiled. "From what I hear, you've been doing considerably more than that." I'm told that you completed a training evolution that was specifically designed to be beyond your capabilities, and that you did so while maintaining the highest standards of medical care for your patients. It was challenging, sir, but I had excellent training and preparation. I'm also told that you're Senior Chief Mitchell's daughter, the commander continued. I served with your father on several occasions during my junior officer years. He was one of the finest SEALs I ever had the privilege of working alongside. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of pride and sadness that always came with discussions of her father's career. Thank you, sir. He would be honored to hear you say that. Commander Patterson reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. Your father left quite a legacy in the SEAL community, Petty Officer Mitchell. But, from what I've observed, you're building your own legacy that's equally impressive. He opened the box to reveal a military decoration, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat V device. This is for your actions during the training evolution 2 weeks ago. The citation reads, for meritorious service in the performance of outstanding achievement while serving as medical support during a challenging training evolution. Petty Officer Mitchell demonstrated exceptional courage, professional competence, and dedication to mission accomplishment under demanding conditions. Her actions exemplify the highest standards of the United States Navy and reflect great credit upon herself and Naval Special Warfare Command. Sarah stared at the medal in shock. She had never expected to receive official recognition for what she viewed as simply doing her job under difficult circumstances. Sir, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Commander Patterson replied. Your actions spoke for themselves. But, there is something I'd like you to consider. The commander closed the metal box and handed it to Sarah. We're developing a new program to improve medical support for Special Operations Forces. It involves extensive training, deployment opportunities, and the chance to work at the absolute cutting edge of military medicine. The program needs people with your combination of medical expertise, physical capability, and mental toughness. Sarah felt her heart racing. What kind of program, sir? Special Operations Combat Medic Certification. It's designed for corpsmen who will be embedded directly with SEAL teams during operational deployments. The training is brutal, almost as demanding as BUD/S itself, but successful graduates become full members of the Special Operations community. The offer was staggering. Sarah had never imagined that such an opportunity might be available to her, and the thought of earning a place as a full member of the Special Operations community was almost overwhelming. The training starts in 6 months, Commander Patterson continued. If you're interested, I can submit your application. But, I want you to understand that this isn't about your father's legacy or proving points about gender integration. This is about recognizing exceptional talent and giving it the opportunity to reach its full potential. Sarah looked down at the metal box in her hands, then back at Commander Patterson. Sir, I'm definitely interested. Good. We'll get the paperwork started. The commander turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Mitchell. Your father would be proud of what you've accomplished here. But, I think he'd be even more proud of what you're going to accomplish in the future. After Commander Patterson left, Sarah sat alone in the medical bay, staring at the medal and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 3 months ago, she had been an outsider fighting for basic acceptance and respect. Now she was being offered the opportunity to join the most elite medical community in the military. She pulled out her phone and called her mother to share the news. After explaining about the medal and the training opportunity, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Sarah, her mother said finally, her voice thick with emotion, your father always said that the Trident chooses its own. He would say that it doesn't matter how someone comes to earn it, what matters is that they prove themselves worthy of wearing it. That night, Sarah opened the wooden box on her dresser and looked at her father's Trident ring. She had worn it secretly for weeks, drawing strength from its presence but never revealing its significance. Now she understood that she didn't need to hide behind her father's legacy anymore. She had earned her own place in the SEAL community through her actions, her determination, and her refusal to accept limitations that others tried to place on her. 6 months from now, she would begin the most challenging training of her military career. If she succeeded, she would earn her own trident not as Senior Chief Mitchell's daughter, but as Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell, a warrior in her own right. But she had already won the most important victory. She had proven that respect couldn't be given or inherited, it had to be earned through courage, competence, and the willingness to face any challenge with determination and honor. The SEALs had overlooked her when she first arrived at Coronado. But, when Commander Patterson saw the Trident ring and paused to recognize what it represented, he wasn't just acknowledging her father's legacy. He was recognizing that the values symbolized by that ring, courage, commitment, and the refusal to abandon your teammates, lived on in a new generation of warriors. Some people spent their entire careers trying to prove they belonged. Sarah had discovered that belonging wasn't about being accepted by others, it was about having the courage to claim your rightful place and the strength to hold on to it, no matter what obstacles stood in your way. The ring had revealed her father's legacy, but her actions had created her own.